It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. Michael Mann, director of this week's featured film, The Keep, is really well known to be a fantastic writer and director. Mann first came to some prominence with 1981's Thief, starring James Caan, and it was a big hit at where else? The Cannes Film Festival. But The Keep would be his follow-up film, but it was really the mid-'80s when his star really skyrocketed. Before getting into major motion pictures, Mann had spent a lot of time writing for television shows like Starsky and Hutch, Police Story, Police Woman, and Vegas. And then in 1984, Mann scored perhaps one of the most iconic 80s wins ever. He brought Miami Vice to NBC. Between the adult action, the music, the style, Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas became massive stars. And to this day, in 80s parties all over the world, you will always see a Crockett and Tubbs in attendance. But that's not all that Mann was doing during this time. What he was also working on was a somewhat underscored beloved film, which is called Manhunter. And that was the first film adaptation of Thomas Harris's really popular Hannibal Lecter character. And once Miami Vice completed in 1990, Mann went back to films with a string of pretty popular movies like The Last of the Mohicans, Heat, The Insider, which got him nominated for Best Director, Best Screenplay, and Best Picture Oscars, Ali, about Muhammad Ali, and Collateral, before coming back around full circle to write and direct a film version of Miami Vice. So that brings us to The Keep. Mann's original cut is 210 minutes, which is 3.5 hours long, but Paramount Pictures only allowed him to make a 2-hour movie, so they cut it down to about 2 hours, and when they attempted to screen that to a test audience, just weeks before its release, it was received fairly poorly. So Paramount, against Mann's wishes, cut it down further at the last minute to only be 96 minutes. This is a particular problem because various things like the score, which was done by Tangerine Dream, and they did like the theme song and the incidental music. Well, when you cut a movie that's already been applied to, it creates weird jumps. And it also creates weird continuity issues in the movie. It also blows open plot holes. And one of the worst cuts that was made, which was of all the things that Mann is especially frustrated that got cut, was the complete removal of what was known as the happy ending. Some of the production stills sent to magazines and used in promotional materials showed things that were ultimately cut out. So actors, when promoting the film, explained how the ending comes out positive and so forth, but that's not the version of the film that got out into the world. It was pretty much a disaster. I mean, Michael Mann disowns this movie, and some television versions of the movie did put the original ending back into the film, but most people haven't seen that version of the movie. But let's get into the movie that was released to the world. The movie opens with a German battalion led by Jürgen Prochnow rolling into a town, and some of the soldiers mention that they would rather be in Russia marching toward Moscow to put the final defeat on the communists. And Prochnow, who plays Captain Klaus Vormann, he seems pretty content with being no longer on the front lines, no longer being in the battle. He even tries to play it off as saying, well, by the time we get there, it'll all be over, so it's no sense in pushing forward. And he has some really interesting ideas about what he's fighting for, what he's doing, and so forth. He's a very complex character that I think, unfortunately, a lot of that gets cut with the shorter version of the movie. But he's looking around town, and he investigates this structure that appears to be a citadel. And this town is this really secluded place in Romania. And there is a priest there who says that this place is called The Keep. And he even explains that there are something like 108 symbols or idols that essentially look like crosses that are on the walls within the keep. But nobody really knows where it came from. Some believe that it was the Turks that built this place. Some believe that it was Wallachian warlords that built it. But either which way, Klaus notices that the keep is seemingly built backwards, with larger stones on the inside of the structure and smaller ones on the outside. A couple of soldiers that night decide to loot the lone silver cross in the keep, despite the warnings of the caretaker, who says that nothing should be taken off the walls and nothing should be messed with. In fact, I'm not saying this because I don't like Nazis, but I don't think you guys should be sticking around here. But in doing this, the soldiers unknowingly release a spectral creature by the name of Radu Molasar. Molasar quickly and gruesomely kills the soldiers. Glaken, who's played by Scott Glenn, is another mysterious character or creature who wakes up several hundred miles away with the knowledge that Molasar has been released, and he decides that he needs to journey towards that Romanian village. Now, a few more German soldiers are killed by Molasar. That brings a sadistic Nazi officer by the name of Erich Kempfer to the little village. Erich is played by Gabriel Byrne, and the first thing that he does is line up 5 men from the village and have them executed in place of the 5 dead German soldiers that have happened in between the time that Klaus arrived with his battalion and when Erich arrives with his black-suited Nazis that are like the really, really bad soldiers. So he also says that for each additional dead German soldier, 5 more locals will be executed. This is really, really much to Klaus's dismay, as they have seen nothing that indicates that the locals are part of a scheme, and no security seems to protect anyone from being killed inside the keep. So we have Erich, who believes that there are Romanian partisans fighting against the Nazi occupation. Klaus knows there is something much more going on, even if he can't really speak to it or understand what's going on. The local priest knows of only one person who can read this inscription in the wall within the keep that's written in a dead language. This man, by the name of Professor Kuza, is played by Ian McKellen and is currently inside a concentration camp. So the priest asks for Kuza and his daughter Ava to come to the town so that he can help them ultimately, once they kind of do enough to trick the Nazis. Hopefully the priest will help Kuza and his daughter get free, but then also escape into total freedom away from the town, away from the Nazis and so forth. However, Kuza, though, he's in pretty bad shape. He's in a wheelchair and pretty frail. And meanwhile, Glaken is still on his way to the keep using this mysterious power that he has with glowing eyes and such to bully and scare Nazi soldiers out of his way, and also letting him pass down the road into the town. Now, a couple of soldiers under Kempfer's command attempt to rape Ava, but Molasar comes to her rescue by making these Nazis' goddamn heads explode. I love the idea of Nazi head explosions, I'll tell you what. But the smoky entity arrives into Professor Kuza's room carrying Ava, and Kuza and Molasar strike a bit of an alliance. Molasar heals Kuza and basically makes him a little bit younger, makes it so that he's able to act more independently of his wheelchair and so forth. And Kuza kind of realizes that maybe Molasar can help him with this Nazi problem that's going on in the world. Kuza is also thankful to Klaus, who seems to be a humane man who just so happens to be a German soldier. Besides, Klaus doesn't really buy into the stuff that Erich does, and he wants to help try to protect Ava and really kind of get her someplace safe so that she's not just either raped again or killed for being Jewish. Glaken arrives the same day Klaus brings Ava to the local inn for safety. Almost instantly, Glaken successfully seduces Ava, despite her seeing that he has no reflection in the mirror. Meanwhile, Molisar is slowly getting a corporeal body, and it's pretty gross too. He's all bones and sinewy muscle and goop, and in 2 days he says he'll be complete, but he needs something removed from the keep in order for him to escape and wipe out those Nazis. Glaken, though, warns Professor Kuza not to remove the talisman that he wants taken out of the keep. So Kuza has the Nazis arrest the mysterious stranger. Glaken is gunned down when he attacks some of the officers, and inside, Eric shoots and kills Klaus when Klaus rejects the way Eric relies on his superiority complex. Eric finds his men murdered and decayed, and he's then confronted by Molisar. When he asks the creature where he came from, Molisar says that he comes from all of us. He's like the physical embodiment of hatred and evil and stuff, similar to what Klaus told Eric, that whatever's happening inside the keep is coming from us, not, it's not the outsiders doing it. It's not something, we are feeding this thing. So Kuza is now freed to remove the talisman to allow Molisar out of the keep, but Ava begs him to reconsider. Seeing this, Molisar says, well, hey, Kuza, you should kill your daughter. But he refuses. Molisar takes back all of the health that he gave to Kuza, making him a diseased husk again. Glaken arrives to battle Molisar, which leads to the creature being imprisoned once again. All right, so let's get to my 3 things I like about the keep. Each week, I find 3 things I like about a movie, no matter how good or bad it is. It helps keep this show a positive one, I think, and too much subjective negativity and black and white thoughts about things that should remain objective in this world. So, first up, the Tangerine Dream score is really good and very moody. At times, it reminds me a little bit of how John Carpenter will use music as more of an ambiance than having something that is in the forefront and manipulative. It drones in some scenes that makes it ever present, but also unsettling. It is a very classic 80s synthesized score that plays nicely to the contrasting rural World War II setting. It also reminds me of some of the incidental music that was used for Doctor Who in the 80s as well, and that's always a pleasant thing to be reminded of. Next, I really like this town where the movie takes place. I have no idea if it is based on a real place or not, but I love how every building is built into the side of a rock-faced cliff. It's like the interior of the buildings are cut out of the rock, but then there are the more normalized wooden porches, doorways, and just the general facades that look like a normal house. It's such a cool design for a secluded village, and I know that this movie was filmed in a rock quarry or something like that in Wales. So, at the base of this quarry where you had the buildings built into the structure, but I would love to know if there are places that are actually like this, because it's a really cool idea. Lastly, I feel like there is something interesting here. I feel like the cut down version of this movie does suffer from things moving both too fast and too slowly. I feel like that odd pacing would have been helped by the entire film still being intact. But what we have here is the start to something really interesting, a creature being kept imprisoned in this keep. Then you have it, being stirred by the evils of what's going on in the world with the Nazis rising to power and so forth. However, some of the Nazis here aren't so bad. Some are just opportunists that would like to steal the nickel crosses to turn a quick mark. But the captain of these guys, Klaus, is not into the ideology. So that keeps him somewhat safe, it seems, from the wrath of Molisar. Meanwhile, you have the really cruel officer in Eric that could be feeding this creature. And then you have Professor Kuza, who is hurt and angry and easy to turn into an accomplice with just some little lies told by the creature. So you have a lot of interesting pieces, and then you have Glaken. And I think he might be an angel, but I'm not so sure. He is obviously the antithesis to Molasar, but is he really a good guy? He seems to manipulate Ava. He also doesn't seem to have a great deal of emotion. He seems just kind of selfish. There were lines here and there about how he has been here to deal with Molasar, but if that's true, then how did he succeed the first time without being trapped inside the keep with the monster like he is this time? Or is he just placed there after the last guy to have his job imprison Molasar? So you see, there's the start of something that I feel like a longer cut of the movie would resolve. And that feels like a lukewarm like on this movie, but I do actually mean that in a positive way, saying that what was there is most definitely something I'm fascinated by and would like to have had more expansion upon it. Without it, the movie does pace itself awkwardly. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. Additionally, hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. You can also check out new posts at my website, bmovieanima.com, each and every Friday. So until next week, stay spooky.